All right, let's jump into chapter 2. Okay, it's a little bit of a boring chapter, but it's important. So, measurement and nature of delinquency. Um, Ultimately, this chapter we're going to talk about different ways to collect data so that we, the people in law enforcement, corrections, the educational world, know how much and what kind of delinquency is taking place in our community. Why is that important? It's important so we can know where resources need to go in order to keep the numbers down. Make sense? I hope so. I'm skipping over that. So in this chapter, we're going to talk about some different sources of data that will give us information on delinquency. And I think the next slide will tell us. A lot of us will get our information about what kinds of crime is being committed from the media, from sensational crimes that are reported in the news. And a lot of times that will skew our concept of how much crime is actually taking place. So to get more accurate numbers, we would use things like self-report studies, Uniform Crime Report, the National Crime Victimization Survey, or court statistics. So we're going to talk about each of those a little bit. Uniform Crime Report. This is a report that is published every year by the FBI. The data is collected through local law enforcement agencies, and they fill out documents, forms, and once they're done with their case, they forward all that information off to the FBI so that, oops, I didn't mean to do that, so that the FBI can put together all the data in a nice, neat report. There are two different types of crimes that they talk about in here. I kind of will skim over this part. I think you can tell the difference between a violent crime and a property crime. So that's basically what that's saying. But each month, police departments across the United States report to the FBI the number of offenses cleared by arrest. Clearance rate. Okay, so this is a big red flag when we're talking about trying to get accurate data. The only data that is being sent to the FBI from local law enforcement agencies are cases that are cleared. So first and foremost, imagine how many crimes occur every day that are not even reported. And then how many crimes occur every day that are reported but not solved. So the only numbers you're getting here are the cases that have been cleared. So probably an accurate little snapshot, a little tiny taste of what's going on, but in a much smaller number than it really is occurring in the community. So think, for example, I usually ask this when we're in class, how many of you have had your cars broken into, or your phone stolen at school, or, something like that. And I would ask typically, hey, how many of you actually reported this crime? And about half of you would probably say, I didn't even bother because it wasn't worth the hassle. Think about that, and then the other millions of reasons why people don't choose to report crimes. So again, the Uniform Crime Report is solid data from law enforcement agencies, but the big hang-up that we have here is that it's only cleared crimes. So we talked about in 2014, only 56% of juvenile cases, of the 1 million juvenile delinquency cases, actually went to court. So this is data that we would miss out on. This is just a little chart that shows you that there's a 56%. These all went up here to court. These come down here to informal sanctions. All right, self-report surveys. These are surveys that are done with groups of people anonymously, where they ask people to admit any crimes that they have committed. So again, think about this. If you raped someone when you were 16 years old, are you thinking that you might want to open up in that self-report study and suddenly share the horrific crime that you committed? I don't know, maybe, but also maybe not. Could you also lie the other way and say that you were this horrible person, that you did all these things, but you didn't really just because you want to be a clown? Yeah, So self-report studies, surveys, are they accurate? They can be, but there are obviously problems. Then we have the National Crime Victimization Survey, NCVS. This is really similar to self-report studies, except for these are surveys that are done with just random people anonymously where they report crimes they have been the victim of. So again, could be the same thing. People could be, clowns and trying to be funny and make up all kinds of stuff, or they could be mentally ill and make up all kinds of stuff. Or, if you were raped when you were 16, are you going to suddenly open up on because you've been given a National Crime Victimization Survey? I don't know, maybe not. So anyways, things to think about. So there are some pros and cons to all of these. National Crime Victimization Survey shows that juveniles are highly overrepresented in comparison to other age groups in the population of those victimized. Really sad. Juveniles between 16 and 19, highest victimization rates. Why do juveniles have high victimization rates? Can you think why? Juveniles are dependent on adults typically. If you are dependent on someone, are you likely to report that they are beating you or raping you or stealing from you? Just a thought. Okay. The National Crime Victimization Survey is interesting in that it does find that males are more likely to be victims than females, and African Americans are more likely to be victims than whites of violence. Okay, another type of group to study is a cohort. And a cohort, and I'm going to explain a cohort because some friends of mine, my friends' parents who are in their 70s, are in a cohort study that has been taking place for 50 years. They have been followed for 50 years to see if to basically rate how happy they are in their marriage, which I think is really cute and funny. So every year, they will meet with the researchers for 50 years now. They've been doing this. Every year they meet with the researchers, and the researchers will assess how happy they are. So think about this for juveniles. Or crime. They might get a group of females born in 1995, between 1995 and 2000, and follow them for 20 years to see what kind of crimes they commit, if any, and if they have anything else that is in common. So cohorts, basically, it's a longitudinal, meaning a long-term study that takes place over, again, a significant period of time with a group of people that have something in common. I hope that makes sense. Social factors. Does gender, race, ethnicity, peer pressure, and social class relate to delinquency? I think you're all going to say yes, 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 and yes. Gender, if you are male, you are more likely to be a delinquent. If you are in a lower socioeconomic status, struggling financially, you are more likely to be delinquent. And race and ethnicity. If you are African American, Hispanic, more likely. Now, does that mean all boys are bad? Or all poor people are bad? Or all African Americans or Hispanics are bad? No. It means that there is a common factor that makes things a little bit more challenging for them. If you will think about the life race, the race of life, I think that was what our discussion question for today. Think about that, the social factors. So gender and delinquency, like I said, boys are much more likely than girls to get arrested. African Americans are overrepresented in arrest, conviction, and incarceration. In contrast, in most self-report studies, African Americans are not significantly worse in their prevalence or frequency of offending. So clearly, the United States, our judicial system, our criminal justice system, does appear to be significantly biased, and it is heart-wrenching because I have witnessed it in person in a courtroom. And I think that I would be foolish. Any of us would be foolish to say that it's not true. We'll talk a lot more about this later. Socioeconomic status. This is another one. Decades of debate have still not produced a consensus on the relationship about socioeconomic status and delinquency. But typically, the rates of delinquency are higher among those with lower socioeconomic status. Peers. If you hang out with, what is it, the phrase, if you lie with dogs, you get fleas. I'm not trying to say that people are dogs, but yeah, if you hang out with people who smoke weed and steal cars, you're more likely to do so too. Again, that does not mean that you are going to, just because you're poor, does not mean you're going to be a delinquent. Just because your friends are questionable doesn't mean you're going to be delinquent. So, social policies, gun violence. There was a time in the United States when this was a really significant fear that young people were really going to go off the charts with with violence, and specifically gun violence. So youth who carry guns are more likely to live in communities with a higher prevalence of gun violence. Well, that would make sense. Youth in communities with higher rates of violence are more likely to carry guns. Youth who carry guns are significantly more likely to engage in serious assaults and robberies. All this stuff, if you read it, it makes sense. 7 strategies to reduce juvenile gun violence. I'm going to kind of skip. You can read all this. I'm not going to ask you anything about this. So take a minute. You can just pause it if you want to look at this. But yeah, these are some strategies to reduce gun violence. Oh my gosh, and that was it? Whew. I thought this was a long, boring chapter. We made it. Yay.